really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man, Nigel Farage. On tonight's show, judges confirm that 3 police officers were passed over for promotion for being white. Will this add fuel to the fire in the 2-tiered policing row? Next up, the Tory leadership battle is heating up, with Tom Tugendhat saying MPs must end the culture of denial over the motives of violent criminals, and even turning fire on Reform leader Nigel Farage. And as an Italian sprinter becomes the first transgender Paralympian, what does this mean for disabled female athletes? All of that is coming up after your news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. It's just coming up to 7:01. Well, the top story tonight, the Health Secretary says the deaths of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham last June could and should have been prevented. Wes Streeting says a review shows the NHS made multiple and fundamental failures in the care given to Valdo Callacane, who killed Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates. The trust involved, though, insists it has improved.
What the Care Quality Commission have uncovered is deeply distressing, most of all for the families of Grace, Barnaby and Ian, who, in addition to having to deal with the unbearable and unimaginable grief they're going through, are doing so in the knowledge that this could have been prevented and should have been prevented, that there wasn't a single point of failure, but multiple and fundamental failures on the part of the NHS to manage Valdo Callacane's treatment in a way that not only kept him safe, but most importantly kept others safe.
A 32-year-old man has appeared in court charged with the attempted murder of an 11-year-old girl in central London. Ioan Pinatru's been charged with attempted murder and possessing a bladed article, with prosecutors claiming members of the public intervened when the girl was attacked just before lunchtime yesterday. A 13-year-old who prosecutors have alleged punched and kicked the door of a hotel housing asylum seekers has today pleaded guilty to threatening unlawful violence. The teenager, who can't be named because of her age, is one of several convicted today after recent riots. She'll be sentenced at Basingstoke Magistrates Court in September. As we heard from Martin at the top of the hour, Conservative leadership hopeful Tom Tugendhat has accused Sir Keir Starmer of a failure of leadership over the disorder in recent weeks. The former Security Minister said the disorder seen on the UK streets was completely unacceptable and has condemned what he called racist thugs as he opened a speech in central London earlier.
This has been the government's first real test, and the Prime Minister fell short. When we needed a strong government, we got a party in the mindset of opposition. We needed a leader. We got a lawyer waiting for the case to reach court. You have to be determined and aware throughout. You have to be ready to do the job from day one.
5,000 migrants have crossed the Channel and arrived in the UK since Labour came to power. Former head of Border Force Tony Smith told us earlier that Sir Keir Starmer's plans to smash the gangs will, he says, be very difficult to achieve.
We expect the UK to be able to smash the gangs, if you like, without some form of international collaboration where powers can be used by other countries on their jurisdictions to bring people to justice and to prevent people and goods crossing borders, etc., rather than the UK being able to do this on their own.
In the US, Donald Trump has called Joe Biden's decision to quit the presidential race a coup during the talks with tech billionaire Elon Musk last night. That interview finally got underway on the social platform X, with more than 1.3 million people tuning in, after, though, a delay which Elon Musk has blamed on a cyber attack. Well, during their conversation, the US presidential candidate criticised the EU and his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris. And finally, in sport, England cricket captain Ben Stokes has been sidelined for the rest of the summer after a scan revealed he suffered a torn hamstring. The 33-year-old had to be helped off the field in Sunday's match against Northern Superchargers. Ollie Pope will now lead the team in his place for the three-match series against Sri Lanka, which starts next week, though Stokes is aiming to be fit in time for October's tour of Pakistan. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Martin up next. I'll be back with you in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now, welcome to Farage. I'm standing in for the big man. I'm Martin Daubney. Now, serious questions have been raised about the conduct of our police in recent weeks, with two-tier policing becoming a point of contention. But a new employment tribunal has raised further concerns about law and order in the UK, and that's because 3 white police officers at Thames Valley Police have won a discrimination case after an employment judge ruled that they were passed over for promotion because of their race. Detective Inspector Philip Turner-Robson, Inspector Graham Horton and Custody Inspector Kirstine Bishop had all worked at the force for between 19 and 26 years when they were effectively blocked from applying for the role of Detective Inspector. Well, Superintendent Annie Bailey was told to make it happen by appointing an Asian sergeant to the post without even holding a competitive process or advertising the vacancy. So, as the employment judge ruled that the decision clearly constituted positive discrimination, what is happening at the heart of UK policing? Well, to discuss this, I'm now joined by Shabnam Chowdhury, former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police Force. Welcome to the show, Shabnam. Always a pleasure to have your opinion. We hear a lot about two-tier policing on the streets. Would you concur it's fair to say that this is two-tier policing at the recruitment stage? 3 white officers clearly passed over for a vacancy simply because of the colour of their skin. Isn't that racism?
Well, it is racism, and that's been defined as such, and that they were disadvantaged and discriminated against. And well done to those 3 officers for standing up to the organisation. Shame on the Deputy Chief Constable and the Superintendent who decided to hold a process. It wasn't a promotion. In fact, it was a job opportunity, which the same principles apply. Would you say it's two-tier policing? No, it's not two-tier policing, Martin, because if you look at the thousands of cases where black and minority officers are disadvantaged on promotion, development opportunities, there's factual evidence of that. There are a number of reviews and reports. The Metropolitan Police most recent one was a Casey review, which talked about police officers being disadvantaged because of the colour of their skin. However, what I would say in this case, these officers fitted into one of those 8 protected characteristics. Race was being the case, and I think they were described as white British officers. Clearly disadvantaged, absolutely awful the way that they were treated. And let's hope that if there are others, that those individuals responsible are exposed.
Shabnam, is this a consequence of the fact that the police themselves, they self-flagellate, they wear hair shirts, they continually tell us that they are institutionally, systemically racist, and as a consequence, there's been this swing of the pendulum too far the other way. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Cases like this clearly show that we've just gone too far, and it's not fair.
Well, cases like this, fortunately, this is actually unique, unless there are plenty of others that you can think of. But I can think of as many from officers from all different backgrounds, whether they're white, black, disability, from the LGBT community, whichever. But I don't think this is a case of policing gone horribly wrong. I think this is a case of the organisations concerned, many have already been labelled institutionally racist, homophobic, sexist, misogynistic, but clearly don't want to accept and own those labels. So this is probably just another example of the way that officers are disadvantaged by, poor leadership.
Do you think it's the case that this is rare, or do you think actually these are just people that are rare because they've spoken out about it? The consequences of speaking out about racism, prejudice when you're white, it's almost career-ending if you fail in your action. I speak to friends of mine who have been in the cop force for 8, 10 years in Nottinghamshire. They tell me this is routine. They absolutely believe that you're disadvantaged now going for a promotion if you're a white person. The odds are stacked against you. It isn't a level playing field. You're at an advantage if you're an ethnic minority, or if you're gay. I hear that. Have you not heard that before?
Yeah. I hear people complain, and if they've got complaints and they, make a case for it, as do these officers, then good luck to them. But if that was the case, then you would see an organisation that was full of Black, Asian, minority officers that were at the highest levels of policing, but they are clearly underrepresented in those particular areas. And actually, you give a really good example of how people are subjected to victimisation and isolation. I sit in that category for many, many years in my career. And actually, your GB News is one of the only platforms where I get absolute abuse from your listeners. Constant comments like, oh, she only got to where she did because she's female or because she's Asian and she was probably useless and, rubbish at her job, and then you get the pylons and stuff like that. That's what I was used to in policing, and that's what I'm used to outside of policing. I hope that those 3 officers that did complain and that won their cases are protected, because they could be subjected to victimisation themselves. But let's hope they have some very good support around them.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear if you get stick from anybody, let alone people from GB News. I'm desperately sorry to hear that. But back to this case in point, do you think these kind of cases help people from an ethnic minority background or any minority background if there is this feeling? No doubt you said this yourself in the past when we've spoken before, Shabnam. You only got this job because you're in a privileged and an advantaged group. As a consequence, it kind of undermines the whole process.
It does, and you bring on another really good point, because what actually happens is when those Black and minority officers that are in policing that are really, really good at their job and they're constantly being hounded, because a case like this could actually elevate that to other people thinking, see, we told you so, because this is what a lot of people think already. And now all those officers that work damn hard, whether they're Black or white, whichever, on both sides of the coin, but particularly Black and Asian officers, they get labelled and they get tarnished, and then it makes their life very, very difficult when they're trying to do the job. And let's be very clear, there are some absolute useless police officers within policing. There are absolutely fantastic ones too. And there are those that should never have got into the job. And we're finding that out, particularly around the corruption and the challenges around the dirty cops that you have in policing. But equally, everybody should be treated on their merits. And if they get a job and they apply for their job, they should get it on the basis of, 1, that they were good at the promotion or the assessment centre, and 2, that they can actually deliver on the job that they're applying for. OK, Shabnam Chowdhury, former Detective Superintendent at the Met. Thanks for appearing. And once again, I'm sorry to hear that you get stick. I know that you're an excellent copper and you deserve your job totally on merit. Thank you, Shabnam. Now, joining me is my panel in the studio. I've got the human rights campaigner and activist Peter Tashu and the communications officer at the IEA, Reem Ibrahim. Let's start with you, Peter. What's your take on this? This is clearly a case that's captured the headlines. We don't hear of it this often. Do you think it's fair to say, though, that the point I made to Shabnam, that has the pendulum swung too far? We do hear a lot of cases in the RAF, in the army, in lots of our public bodies now. White people feel they're discriminated against. Do they have a point?
Well, there's no doubt that in some cases, white people are unjustly passed over. But looking at things overall, at most higher level posts in the army, the police, the government and so on, you often see, in the civil service, for example, a predominance of white people and an underrepresentation of Black and Asian people. So that is the context. And of course, that does not justify what happened to these 3 white officers. But the overwhelming majority of cases of discrimination are discriminations against black and Asian people, not against white people. I think these particular cases with these three officers is quite rare. No justification whatsoever. And indeed, the Employment Tribunal ruled that, given the underrepresentation of black officers, that it was a legitimate aim to seek to promote an Asian officer.
Why?
But it was not a legitimate method.
Why is it legitimate to promote people simply because of their their kind of their skin colour, their sexuality?
It's racism, effectively. And effectively what we're saying here is that discrimination in all instances is wrong. I think we can all agree with that wholeheartedly. Of course there is going to be an over-representation of white people in high offices because the majority of people in this country are white. We cannot sit here and actually talk about these kind of instances and think about under-representation. And if anything, I actually think that black and Asian ethnic minorities, or I hate all of these different terms, I don't even know where I sit in that particular term. But ethnic minorities are, in many ways, overrepresented in some instances, if we're talking about it by proportion of the entire population in the UK. So I think we have to be very, very clear. Discrimination on the basis of your gender, of your sex, or indeed of your race is wrong in all instances. And that discrimination against white people seems to be increasing. I actually think what's really interesting about this is clearly there is a reputational link. Companies themselves will often implement these kind of diversity quotas in order to come across as though they are much more woke, they are much more kind, they actually care about diversity in those ways. And what we are doing is sacrificing merit. You should only be judged based on how good you are at the job and not by the colour of your skin.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's indeed what the Employment Tribunal ruled. They said it's a good thing to uplift black and Asian officers, but not in this way, where a relatively junior Asian officer, a sergeant, was promoted above three white officers who had more qualifications, higher rank and experience.
And back to the point that I put to Shabnam there, and that is, if there's this suspicion, this whiff, that you're only promoted if you're an ethnic minority, if you're LGBTQ, whatever it is, because of that status, that doesn't help anybody.
Absolutely not. It's got to be based on merit and experience. And that was clearly not the case, or appears not to be the case, with regard to these three white officers. They should have got the job.
We see this time and time again, and ultimately I believe it's the government's fault. We see this in legislation, equalities legislation, that promotes this kind of behaviour. And I mean, you mentioned the civil service, Peter. The fact that we have a civil service fast stream only for black, Asian, minority ethnics, I think is absolutely disgusting. This is racism that is being perpetuated by the government against white people. I think we should be abolishing all of those kind of streams altogether, and we should be looking at things on the basis of how good they are actually at the job. Because as you said, I mean, what this does is it means we take away the kind of value that those people have. And somebody like Shabnam will be accused of only getting there because they're an ethnic minority. I get accused of it all the time, and maybe there is some truth in that. Maybe the fact that an ethnic minority young woman has an opinion that is more so on the right means that more people want to listen to it. There are conversations that need to be had here about what the root cause of these problems are. And I think it is absolutely disgraceful that our taxpayer money is being spent on these kind of discriminatory schemes.
Superb. Great stuff. Great start to the show. And thank you, Reem. Thank you, Peter. And we were nodding on and agreeing there. What a great start. Thank you. Now, coming up next, all the latest on the Tory leadership race as Tom Tugendhat calls for an end to MPs' culture of denial over violence across the UK.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good Afternoon Britain. Weekdays from midday.
It's a very difficult issue, this, right? As far as we know, the boxer with male chromosomes was born with female genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. Sex in humans is binary and immutable because we are mammals. And there is a minority of people who have disorders of sexual development, and that can affect a person's reproductive organs. But these people are male or female. And yesterday, what we witnessed was basically just glorified male violence against women and girls. The difference is, I mean, that happens every day all over the world. And the difference is that in every other circumstance, we consider beating up women to be wrong, but it was deemed acceptable by those at the IOC because they're claiming that it's sport. But it's not. It's violence and it's wrong.
Peter, Lottie's right, isn't she, that we've been talking a lot recently about violence against women and girls, and regardless of whether this person is intersex or transgender, they have male chromosomes. That means they have a very, very distinct biological advantage that could actually be fatal to a female athlete competing against them.
Well, of course, sport does need to be fair, and we do need to examine this case very thoroughly. There are reports that the boxer, Iman Khalif, was born a biological woman. She is not transgender. She is not non-binary. She is not intersex. She may have elevated levels of testosterone, but that's entirely natural. It's beyond her control. It's the way she was born. And that is why the International Olympic Committee has said that she falls within the rules.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage. I'm standing in for the big man. I'm Martin Daubney. Now, the Tory leadership race is definitely heating up. Today, former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat has called for a national conversation about the collapse of social trust, as he calls it, in the wake of last week's riots, claiming the unrest has been fueled by misinformation and the rise of both Islamist and also far-right extremism. He even attacked the reckless political rhetoric of the man who's meant to be sat here, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. Let's take a listen.
After the attack on those little girls in Southport, Nigel Farage claimed the truth is being withheld from us. Later, he justified amplifying this false information by saying he had believed influencers like Andrew Tate.
Well, that was Tom Tugendhat putting the boot in. And meanwhile, Shallow Housing Secretary Kemi Badenoch is under fire for comments made on the House of Commons back in 2018, in which she supported relaxing immigration rules for high-skilled workers. And she's now distanced herself from those comments, but will it damage her chances? Well, who has the early lead in this race? Well, joining me now is the former Tory MP and Minister, Sir John Redwood. Sir John, always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So the early shots have been fired. Tom Tugendhat, let's start with him, having a severe dig at Nigel Farage for his reckless rhetoric. Does he have a point?
Well, I think it would be better if the leadership candidates in the Conservative Party concentrated on what the government got wrong and why it was that so many people either went to vote reform or stayed at home. Because I certainly found during that election, and the polls bore it out, that the Tory vote roughly halved from 2019 to the latest election. And most of them didn't go off and vote Labour or Liberal. Indeed, Labour's vote actually fell, and the Liberal vote stayed at a very low level. Suddenly, from nowhere, Reform got 14%, and turnout fell about 10%. So we know that most of the disgruntled Conservatives either voted Reform or they stayed at home. So the leadership candidates should concentrate on why did that happen? And if they stayed in the government throughout the period, as 4 of them did, they have a particularly difficult task to explain why they didn't notice all the things that were going wrong, why they didn't believe the opinion polls, which were telling us for a couple of years that we were going to be wiped out, and why they didn't do something about it. Because some of us on the back benches were constantly having conversations with them and other members of the government saying, for goodness sake, control immigration, for goodness sake, improve the economy rather more, for goodness sake, get tax rates down because you put them up too high, the things that would have actually won some of those voters back, but they obstinately refused to do it.
And so, Sir John, the attack on Kemi Badenoch, dragging up comments she made back in 2018, saying that she wanted to move away from a 20th century conversation about immigration and let students stay in the country for 6 months after graduating, to lift the caps on immigration, precisely the sort of thing that went down like a cup of cold sick at the general election with Conservative voters. Now it's being dragged back up. She's saying that her opponents are clutching at straws, but it does seem like something of a U-turn. Again, what's your take?
Well, it certainly looks like that. I mean, it was a statement in the House of Commons, so we can all check that she actually said it. But I think that's the less serious criticism. I think the more serious criticism is she and the three others who stayed in the government knew that a group of us were telling them that a considerable chunk of the Conservative electorate was extremely angry that we had stood for election in 2019 on getting total migration down from around 200,000, which it was then, to a lower figure. And it actually hit a peak of 740,000. It was completely unacceptable. And they wouldn't accept amendments and proposals that we were putting to them as a collective government to do something about it. It was only towards the end, in January of this year, that the Prime Minister saw the point and made some changes to the rules over how you qualify to get into this country legally, which are now having quite an impact on the numbers, but it was a bit late. And then he didn't allow a year to show the public this was actually going to work and make quite a difference to the numbers. And meanwhile, the other members of Cabinet who are now trying to become leader of the Conservative Party had not been speaking out and had not been recommending such action, and indeed rather more action than the government took.
So, John, can I put a poll to you today that came out, an Ipsos poll, which may be of great concern, and it said that 62% of voters simply don't care who the next Conservative leader is, and in fact, 36% of Conservative voters don't care who the next leader is. Does that sort of point to the sheer level of disengagement, despondency and disappointment with the Conservatives, not only from the wider electorate, but from your own voters? And where do you move on from there?
Well, that's why I'm challenging the leadership contenders to get rather more realistic about the hole that the Conservative Party has found itself in. The Conservative Party only got 24% of the vote in the last general election. And Labour only got 34% of the vote because they were actually losing votes and they were unpopular as well, because people thought there was quite a lot of similarity between the policies the Conservatives have been practicing and quite a lot of the policies which Labour would have carried on with or are now carrying on with. And so, yes, there's a massive disconnect between the consensus policies the two main parties have been following and where the bulk of the electorate has moved to. And that's why I think the challenge has to be to these leaders who want our votes in due course in the membership part of the contest, to be rather more searching and rather more apologetic about what the government got wrong, because clearly it got quite a lot of things wrong, and then to show how they can rebuild with a sensible Conservative proposition, and above all, how they are going to oppose this government, because what I'm quite sure is this government is going to make things worse in many cases, not better. And so there is a very important role for Her Majesty's opposition, and it is a privilege for those in Parliament to be leading the opposition. They've got to do it well, because that might improve the government.
OK, thank you very much, Sir John Redwood. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for your input. And now, of course, I'm still joined by my panel, and that's the human rights campaign and activist Peter Tasho and the communications officer at the Institute of the Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim. Let's start with you, Reem. That poll, I think, makes for a very, very sobering read. It's one thing for 2/3 almost of the population voters to not care, but the eyeballing stat there is 36% of Tory voters don't even care. How big an existential problem is this for the Tories?
It's absolutely huge, Martin. And I think what's really interesting about the Conservative Party leadership election itself is that not many of the stories, not many of the press releases have ended up on the front pages or ended up in news headlines. Now, the Conservative Party, the right as a whole, need to look in the mirror and have a conversation about what it actually stands for. The Conservative Party in 14 years presided over the highest tax burden since the Second World War, immigration at record record levels. And actually, despite the fact that the Conservative Party themselves seem to have come from the route around freedom of choice and individual liberty, they wanted to completely ban tobacco. So I think what's really interesting about all of these conversations is the right need to look in the mirror and ask themselves what they stand for. Now, on this point about Kemi Badenoch herself, I personally agree with her comments back in 2018. I think we should be allowing high-skilled people come to this country and work. We have
Not
currently
students. I mean, there's like 500,000 students and dependents. I mean, this is the policy the electorate. Conservative voters wholesale rejected.
Yes, so I think what's interesting is that the headline figure matters. We cannot handle more than 600,000 people coming every single year. We just cannot handle it. However, we should be thinking about who those people are. We need highly skilled workers. We want intelligent and wealthy people to come to this country and invest.
Or we could just train our own workers and make them highly skilled.
Martin, we've got 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits. Maybe we need to start looking at home first before we start criticising those particular people.
Okay. Peter Thatcher, what's your take on this? Lots of infighting going on, blaming Nigel Farage, exhuming comments from 6 years ago. Kemi Badenoch, they're fighting like rats in a sack.
Well, Kemi Badenoch is clearly eyeing the Tory leadership race. She's clearly out there to ensure that she stands a good chance because she wants to win over the grassroots voters, and we know that they are very strongly anti-immigration. So that's why she's doing her big volte-face about immigration. And as has been mentioned by Reem, we do need skilled workers. Skilled workers add to this economy. So being against new skilled workers being given visas, that is just an own goal. But it's bad for the economy.
But a report was out yesterday talking about the number of jobs given to Nigerians and Indians since the Brexit referendum greatly outstrips the number of jobs that Brits are taking. That's because a lot of those jobs are low-skilled jobs. They've lowered the bar, they've lowered the salary cap, they've lowered the skills requirements, and as a consequence, we're forcing... Well, the problem with that is that Brits are ending up on the dole.
But this is the point, right? I think the problem is that we have such a huge welfare state. How many people are coming to this country, and indeed British people that have come here, that were here initially, are actually taking up other taxpayer money? I think it's immoral. We're seeing more than 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits. And it's you and I, it's hard-working taxpayers that are paying for those particular people to stay at home. And then we then subsidise that and fill in the gap with low-skilled workers from abroad. We need to be, first of all, looking at home and thinking about why we're spending so much money on welfare benefits. I think many of those people, by the way, 5.3 million people, many of those people may well be sick. Many of them may well be sick. However, if all of them are sick, then that is a health scandal, or it is a huge and egregious waste of taxpayer money, or indeed a waste of human potential. These are people that could be working, could be contributing, but are not. I think we need to look at home first and then have a conversation about where we can plug in the gap with other skilled workers.
And invest more in apprenticeships. Yeah, apprenticeships to help British people get the skills that they need and we need for our economy.
A positive note to end on, I think one we can all agree on. Thank you, Reem. Thank you, Peter. Now, next we have a GB News exclusive for you. The cost of the migrant crisis has increased ninefold. An astonishing, wait for it, £6.6 billion last year alone. Astonishing. More on that after the break.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Cooler and clearer across northern areas tonight. Damp and cloudy further east, which will mean any viewing of the meteor shower will be a bit limited for more central and eastern areas. That's because this weather front that's been lingering across the west will finally push further eastwards overnight tonight, spreading cloud and rain into central areas of England at first this evening and then into the southeast probably by tomorrow morning. Further north and west, though, it's clearing up quite nicely and the winds will ease as well after a breezy day. So that will allow temperatures to fall away much lower than they have done lately. We could be down as low as 4 or 5 degrees rurally. Some towns and cities dipping into the single figures as well. But pretty murky start across central areas of England and the southeast first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine, though, for the far north of Scotland in particular. Eastern areas seeing a great start to the day, but as I said, it could be fairly fresh, but the sun will come up and warm things up quite quickly. Fairly good conditions across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England, Western Wales as well, but it's northeast England, central areas and parts of the southeast are likely to see quite quite a grey start to the day. Risk of rain is more limited. I think some of us will see some patchy drizzle, at least through the morning. That could last into the afternoon, particularly across the far southeast. But in general, it will turn a little bit brighter as we head into the afternoon across central areas. And across the north, it's going to be a fairly fine day. Plenty of sunny spells and it should stay dry. Lighter winds mean it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine, highs of 22 or 23 degrees. But the next band of wet weather is arriving on Thursday morning, particularly across western areas of Scotland, where it will persist, as well as Northern Ireland, northwestern England as well. And that will sink southwards through Thursday quite slowly, lingering across the south and east as we head into Friday. So a bit of a potentially wet day across southern areas on Friday, but looking ahead to the weekend, it looks fine, dry and warm.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage. I'm Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man. Now, the latest figures from the Home Office have revealed that the cost of the migrant crisis has surged nearly ninefold over the past 5 years. The budget has simply skyrocketed to £6.6 billion for the year between 2023 and 2024. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the chairman of Facts for EU, Lee Evans. Lee, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show once again. These figures are absolutely eye-watering. There's been a massive, massive increase. Talk us through this stratospheric rise in the cost of the British asylum system.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for having me on. What we tried to do, everyone knows that the migrant crisis has been growing and growing fast. What we tried to do was interrogate government papers, specifically Home Office papers, to see if we could work out just exactly how much it's costing. And the latest figures that we have, as you quite rightly say, 6.6 billion for the current, well, for the year 23-24, so just ended in March. And goodness knows what it's going to be for this year going forward. But that's quite a staggering amount of money, and it shows almost an exponential growth, really, over the last few years. When we look at why this has happened, you know, the Home Office talk about small boats. It's the first thing they mention, is being small boats. And further down the list, just to be fair, there's also the issue of settlement of Afghanis and one or two others that probably the British public wouldn't object to too much. But the sheer hotel costs are such that the government's own independent chief inspector of borders and immigration described them as quite incredible. And he also said, by the way, that Home Office data is unbelievably awful in terms of its quality. We can vouch for that because we've spent 3 weeks working on this set of reports, which GB News has covered, and to try to get to the bottom of exactly what the figures are has been a very difficult process. So we have great sympathy with the chief inspector, who, by the way, was fired by then Home Secretary James Cleverly
Lee Evans, I'm going to interrupt you there because that's the next stage of your report, and we're going to do that as another GB News exclusive later on this week. Let's get back to this one, because there's enough meat on the bone here to dig into. One of the astonishing lines that leapt out from your report at facts4eu.org was that you don't think this is the true figure. You think the true figure could be even higher. You estimate it could even go as high as £10 billion per year. This is simply, Lee Evans, unsustainable.
Yes, it most definitely is, and the reason we say what we say is because it's based on experience. 8 years working 7 days a week, interrogating information like this, you gain a sense. And so what we've done in our report, which you're covering, is quantified what we know of, but we never quantify what we don't know of. We just simply suggest that it may be a great deal more. And one of the reasons we say that, Martin, is it's quite important. Trying to establish which of the areas of spending from the Home Office in various categories. I mean, if you just take one, strategy, for example. Well, an element of strategy, which, by the way, will use some very expensive salaried staff at the Home Office. An element of that is going to be strategy on immigration. Can we identify that cost? No, we can't.
And Lee Evans, I'm going to refer to another report you did previously, and that was quantifying the number of illegal immigrants that have gone into 27 EU member states, something like 4 million over the last 9 years, including 676,000 to Italy. Interestingly, Sir Keir Starmer thinks doing a deal with Italy would unlock the small boat crisis. Well, they can't control their own borders. Lee Evans, we have to leave it there, but we're going to join you again later this week. Always an absolute delight to have you on the show. Let's get back to the panel now to get some reaction to what I think is a simply astonishing set of figures. Peter Tatchell, whatever your thoughts on asylum, those kind of numerics, they simply cannot be sustained.
The cost of the asylum system is unacceptable, and it's needless and unnecessary. It could be cut at a stroke. One of the main reasons for the costs...
By closing the borders?
No, one of the main reasons is people who come to this country, who apply for asylum, are banned from working. The government puts them up in hostels...
That'll be a red carpet.
Hang on. The government puts them up at taxpayers' expense in hostels and hotels. It pays them a benefit every week. Those people, many of them have skills that we need. While their asylum claim is pending, they should be allowed to work.
Are you saying...
Let me finish. To be productive members of the economy, to pay tax and national insurance, to be an asset to the country. That's the way to cut the asylum bill.
OK, Reem Ibrahim, look, listen, are we seriously suggesting that all of those ostensibly young men that Camara Unding are going to be high-net taxpayers, brain surgeons, aircraft pilots?
I don't think anybody's suggesting that.
We know that they are generally low-educated, low socio-economic groups. The notion that we will give them all jobs, that would just roll out the red carpet to the entire world.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. I do think that Peter is right in saying that actually the fact that what taxpayers are having to foot the bill for those particular people, and then at the same time, those particular individuals are then forced to be reliant on the taxpayers. Now, a lot of them actually do end up working illegally, end up in sort of the gig economy, delivering your Indian takeaways, etc. However, whilst I agree with Peter's initial point that taxpayer money shouldn't be wasted in that way, if we were to allow anybody that's on the asylum backlog to work immediately, that would just act as yet another magnet for those particular people to come over here. And ultimately, I'm of the view that actually if you come here illegally, they're illegal migrants. If you come here illegally, you should not be allowed at all. End of.
But when your asylum claim is assessed, if you fail it, then you're out of the country.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen.
But
That's what we need to do. We need to fix the system so those who fail the test who are not legitimate refugees, they are removed.
The Home Office seem to allow so many different types of people that come into this country in the first place. However, those particular people on the asylum backlog, they are still waiting here. They are in limbo. And I agree with Peter's initial point that actually it's unfair that those particular people are forced to effectively be reliant on other taxpayers. However, we cannot...
But they're coming to the country illegally.
Yes, I completely agree. I think the problem here...
They're not being forced to be under benefits or...
When they come here,
they
they're
pay
not...
thousands of pounds, euros, whatever it is, to get here because they think they're going to win the lottery.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then ultimately, when those particular people are here, we're then rewarding them by giving them a hotel that is, again, taxpayer funded.
And giving them a job would be an even bigger reward.
Well, it's not giving, you know, if they contribute to the economy, I think that's perfectly fine. However, they've come here illegally. We have to uphold the rule of law. We saw, I mean, was it just a year and a half ago that a quarter of people that were coming here claiming asylum were from Albania? It's a completely safe country. And then we had a deal with the Albanian government that then stopped that. We need to ensure that we separate illegal migrants from those that are genuinely seeking asylum. And the problem is the Home Office have this huge backlog, as the last guest has already entailed. We have this huge backlog, so we don't know who these people are. There's also a second point I want to quickly raise with Peter's particular argument that actually, if we were to allow all of these people to come here and work, we don't know who they are, we don't know their criminal backgrounds, we don't know what kind of cultures they come from.
They could be members of Islamic State. Reem, Peter, we have to move on, but thank you for a passionate debate. Now, GB News can exclusively reveal that nearly 5,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister at the start of July. Now, with the recent bout of good weather, more than 800 migrants made the illegal journey on Sunday and Monday. It comes as the Labour government starts work on their new border security to smash the gangs. OK, still to come, an Italian sprinter is to become the first transgender Paralympian to compete in a women's race. What does this mean for the Games? Is this a total setback for female athletes?
Good afternoon, Britain. Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK. From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday. We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News. Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Football and gambling can go hand in hand and cause long-term problems. New figures show that young adults aged between 16 and 24 who have bet over the last year are more likely to report mental health issues compared to those in older age groups.
And joining us now to discuss this is Matt Burgess, who is a former gambling addict and now helps those to deal with their own gambling issues.
Yeah, look, I think gambling is one of those things that is so accessible now. You know, everyone's got a kind of mobile phone in their pocket, walks around with a kind of 24-hour casino, if you like. So I think it's really important that people realise that we have to sort of recognise that that is a month of quite condensed gambling, and we don't want people to sort of carry that on into their everyday life, because that's when it can become really risky and you know, it could become addictive.
I had no idea, though, that it was linked to first-time gambling. For the first time, people might be able to pick up and have a go. And then it doesn't end there. It goes on, because by then you've got the bug. Is that how it works?
You've got to remember, for things like the Euros, the World Cup, so you get a lot more people watching football and therefore potentially betting on football.
May I ask you about how severe your own gambling addiction got?
Well, look, I think there was a couple of touch points for me where I realised that things were getting out of hand. There were some times at university where, you know, I kind of thought, you know, I'm definitely doing this a bit too much, but, you know, kind of thought maybe it would move on once I left, but it didn't. It did follow me. And then, you know, I got to points where I was at my worst gambling 16, 17 hours a day. I was spending huge amounts of money. It can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and that was the important thing that we want to highlight is, you know, what can start as fun can become very, very dangerous in a sense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth, about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man. Now, Valentina Petrillo, an openly transgender sprinter, has been selected to represent Italy in the Paralympics. She is 50 years old, transitioned in 2019 and is visually impaired. Now, the candidate is to compete in the women's 200 and 400 metres in Paris. Petrillo has previously won 11 national titles in the men's classification. Well, commenting on a predictably controversial issue, Andrew Parsons, the president of the IPC, said that he wants to see the sporting world unite on transgender policies. Well, that might take some doing. To try and do that now, I'm joined by the human rights campaigner, of course, in the studio, Peter Tatchell, and the transgender teacher and journalist, Debbie Hayton. Debbie, let's start with you. The Olympics caused a huge storm. We saw two biological men win the women's boxing. It's created a huge conversation, I think a massive headache for the entire Olympic community moving forward. And now we move on to the Paralympics. Is this somehow worse? A biological man who competed as a man now competing against disabled women?
Well, in the Olympics, it was a case of two athletes who had a difference of sexual development. So that was a different issue. Here, we've got somebody who is a typical XY male, like me, competing with XX females. And this is wrong. As an XY male, we've been through male puberty. We get a huge advantage through male puberty. We retain much of that advantage, and it leads to competition which can't be described as fair going on in Paris.
Peter Tatchell, hard to disagree with that.
Sport has to be fair, absolutely. You know, we can't have people having unfair advantages. The question is, how do we measure that unfair advantage? And the precise advantage that individual trans athletes had is still open to question. Of course, if they've gone through puberty, as a general rule, a trans person will have an advantage, muscular and skeletal. That's true.
And that's the case in this instance.
But not every trans woman is the same. So, for example, I have a trans woman friend who plays in a women's football team. She is one of the smallest and most petite members of the team. Biological women tower over her, both in height, strength, muscle and skeletal advantage. No one can say that she has an unfair advantage. So I would say there's got to be individual assessment. And if a particular trans person does have a deemed unfair advantage, then of course they shouldn't be allowed in the woman's side. But not all trans women will have that advantage.
But it isn't the only way of dealing with this, Debbie, a simple cheek swab test. Do you have an XY chromosome? Do you have an XX chromosome? The rest is mere detail.
Yes, we can sort the rest out later. You do a cheek swab to find if somebody's got a Y chromosome, yes or no. And that creates the default situation, which category you go into. Then you can perhaps look at certain differences of sexual development. You know, you can look at those conditions compassionately and see perhaps some we would include and some we would not include. But that's different. Here we're talking about transgender people who have been through male puberty and retain the advantage. And Peter will say that not everybody is going to win is going to win against the women. If I was running the park run as a female, I wouldn't have an advantage over the 16-year-old who won the race for the women. But by competing as a female, it's wrong because I would be pushing women down their own category. They're still men. I've transitioned, but they're still men to beat.
But Valentina says she's undergone hormone therapy. Testosterone levels are down. She's actually saying she's much weaker than she was as a biological male.
That may be the case, but still went through male puberty with the skeletal and the muscular advantages that gives.
But what she's suggesting is that, in fact, going through the hormone treatment, many or some of those advantages have been diminished. And if that is the case, I can't assess because I haven't got all the evidence, and neither of you, but if that is the case, then we have to question, does she actually have an advantage? And what I would like to see urgently is some really important high-class research to establish more accurately precisely what advantages that some trans women may have. And then we can make a clear decision and a fair ruling, because there shouldn't be a blanket ban on all trans people without the clear evidence.
But Peter, you use the word fairness. Fairness, in the eyes of 99.9% of people watching, is if you're a biological man, you have an unfair advantage. If you're a Paralympian, if you're a regular Olympian, if you play any sport, that surely is the case, Debbie.
Yes, and fairness is that we compete against our own sex. I'm not decrying trans rights. I'm a great believer in trans rights. I am trans. But let's put our energies into providing proper changing facilities, for example, for trans women who are competing against men. That's where we should be campaigning, not campaigning to involve ourselves in women's sport. That's for the opposite sex.
There's a big issue.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Peter Tatchell, Debbie Hayton, thank you very much. Now, coming up next, the State of the Nation with Tom Holwood. Tom, what's on your show?
Goodness me, Martin, it is a busy show today. We're looking at the state of law and order, dissecting a war of words that is developing between the Reform Party, the Tory leadership candidate Tom Tugendhat, even indeed what Kemi Badenoch has to say too. But we're not just looking at that, we're crossing over to the Atlantic. The EU has been threatening Elon Musk and Twitter too, and we're going to be looking also at defence. There's a very interesting story about defence.
Thank you, Tom. Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Debbie. I'll be back tomorrow, 3 o'clock, Martin Daubney Show. Thanks for joining me tonight. Stick around for State of the Nation. First, though, it's your weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update, brought to you from the Met Office. Cooler and clearer across northern areas tonight. Damp and cloudy further east, which will mean any viewing of the meteor shower will be a bit limited for more central and eastern areas. That's because this weather front that's been lingering across the west will finally push further eastwards overnight tonight, spreading cloud and rain into central areas of England at first this evening and then into the southeast probably by tomorrow morning. Further north and west, though, it's clearing up quite nicely, and the winds will ease as well after a breezy day. So that will allow temperatures to fall away much lower than they have done lately. We could be down as low as 4 or 5 degrees rurally. Some towns and cities dipping into the single figures as well. But pretty murky start across central areas of England and the southeast first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine, though, for the far north of Scotland in particular. Eastern areas seeing a great start to the day, but as I said, it could be fairly fresh, but the sun will come up and warm things up quite quickly. Fairly good conditions across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England, Western Wales as well, but it's northeast England, central areas and parts of the southeast are likely to see quite a grey start to the day. Risk of rain is more limited. I think some of us will see some patchy drizzle at least through the morning. That could last into the afternoon, particularly across the far southeast, but in general it will turn a little bit brighter as we head into the afternoon across central areas. And across the north, it's going to be a fairly fine day. Plenty of sunny spells and it should stay dry. Lighter winds mean it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine, highs of 22 or 23 degrees. But the next band of wet weather is arriving on Thursday morning, particularly across western areas of Scotland where it will persist, as well as Northern Ireland, northwestern England as well. And that will sink southwards through Thursday quite slowly, lingering across the south and east as we head into Friday. So a bit of a potentially wet day across southern areas on Friday, but looking ahead to the weekend, it looks fine, dry and warm.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?